Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grayson. This is the KMG show for Tuesday, November the 16th, 2021. So I'm going to start today by talking about a big subject. We've been hearing, rumors about this, hints, teases for quite some time, but now people are saying it openly. And the source of this is an essay originally on Heard and then later reproduced on the Daily Mail by the Swedish Nigerian, I believe it is, writer Malcolm K. And it is called, Would America Survive a Civil War? He begins, historically speaking, empires on average last for around 250 years, after which they tend to either slowly or very, very quickly fall apart to overreach and internal conflict. Somewhat ominously, the 250th birthday of America is coming up in 2026. Yet when, towards the end of Trump's presidency, a radical friend of mine told me that he thought America was headed for a civil war, I dismissed the argument out of hand. Why? How? It takes a unique confluence of mistakes and crises for civil war to appear possible, and an even longer list of mistakes, crises, and elite screw-ups for them to happen. But 2021 is a different world to 2015. Talk of insurrection, secession, civil conflict, and civil war is no longer the chatter of the gullible and the mentally ill. It's entering the fringes of polite society. Some support this so-called national divorce. Others are opposed to it. Others claim that they would actually prefer to declare war on their own recalcitrant countrymen rather than let them go their own way unmolested. None of this morbid interest in civil conflict is irrational given the times. The year 2021 has thus far been a spectacular year for signs of political decline. The U.S. has now seen all the notable horsemen of the apocalypse that historically herald strife and revolution appear, one after another. Political division among its elites, increasing loss of legitimacy in the eyes of the population, military defeat abroad, and a new and very ominous crisis in the real economy with no end date in sight. Any one of these crises would be bad enough on their own. Taken together, they represent a truly serious threat to the stability of the current order. Still, the question to be answered at the end of the day is quite simple. How likely is civil war or national divorce or a troubles scenario, really? To answer the question accurately, a few misconceptions about it being impossible have to be dealt with. One of the most worrisome aspects of contemporary American political discussion is the sense one often gets that many participants are possessed by a thinly veiled bloodlust. Sometimes that bloodlust is not even thinly veiled. After the unarmed USAF veteran Ashley Babbitt was fatally shot through a locked door in the Capitol building, many anonymous and some less anonymous commentators intimated that perhaps the problem with police violence in America wasn't that officers were shooting and killing too many unarmed people, but rather that maybe they just weren't killing enough of them. Following a wave of destructive riots that tore through many cities in the United States last year, this turn toward open celebration of equally useless violence when it is visited on the enemy team speaks to a dangerous sort of polarization. From this sort of bloodlust flows another very common assertion that a civil war, if waged on American soil, would be over quickly and lead to a fairly effortless massacre of any insurrectionists in flyover America. The idea here is that the U.S. military is so advanced and has so many tanks, gunships, fuel air bombs, and drones that the federal government is simply assured of victory. As such, a civil war is an unlikely or impossible scenario, given the dramatic imbalance of power between the state and even a numerically large, dissatisfied internal population. But this is a dangerous misconception. While the U.S. military is indeed powerful and lavishly funded, it is a military designed to fight other states. Warfare between states is bound by rules and regulations. It is based on consent. This might seem a strange assertion to make, given that a country cannot just decline a war declaration from an enemy, but it holds true. There's a formal or informal understanding of who is an actual combatant and who is not. In contrast, warfare in primitive or tribal societies does not make any distinction between a civilian and a soldier. They are just enemies. Ambushing and killing a 12-year-old girl drawing water at the creek is seen as normal as killing an adult warrior. This is where the European habit of calling uncivilized peoples savages comes from. Rather than merely being an expression of racist chauvinism, Europeans were in fact oftentimes shocked by the habit of Native Americans and other peoples to not play by the rules. But playing by the rules is a mug's game. An insurgency in America has about as much reason as the Native Americans once did to follow the rules of their enemies. They are under no compulsion to wear blinking strobe lights to make themselves easier for the drones to target. And that simple fact means that a counterinsurgency effort in the U.S. is almost certainly doomed to fail. In counterinsurgency warfare, everything that makes the U.S. Armed Forces great, high-tech weapon platforms with immense destructive power, are not just useless, but counterproductive. A tank parked outside a shopping mall in Idaho will either spend its time shooting at nothing or be at a very high risk of killing innocent American civilians for the high crime of looking suspicious. Droning American weddings, like Afghan ones, does very little to advance the goals of a counterinsurgency. If anything, it only makes the relatives of the dead more likely to fight. The U.S. Armed Forces are also at least an order of magnitude too small to do the job effectively. During Operation Banner, the British military deployed at most 20,000 soldiers in Northern Ireland to keep a lid on that wayward province. The U.S. Armed Forces consist of about 1.3 million active duty personnel, but this is spread out over 5 branches: Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, and only a small minority of military personnel are actually combat troops. It is thus very unlikely that the armed forces could scramble more than 100,000 regulars willing to do the job of holding an M4 carbine and patrolling down the main street of any town, Texas. To put that into perspective, Northern Ireland is about 2% the size of Texas. Then there's the fact that the most significant political split in America is between rural areas and coastal metropoles, and the armed forces are reliant on the very areas it would be tasked with policing as far as recruiting soldiers goes. Red America is overrepresented within the armed forces, and this won't change. As such, the U.S. doesn't have too few soldiers, it has potentially unreliable ones, and the more brutality is used against recalcitrant red states, the more these soldiers will be ordered to fight and kill their own friends and family, a recipe for serious mutiny and disobedience. Finally, there is an even greater elephant in the room. In the case of an American drone pilot accidentally blowing up a wedding in Afghanistan, the Afghan relatives of the slain have very little recourse. If an American drone pilot blows up an American wedding, however, that drone pilot and his or her family lives in the United States. Given the likely unreliability of some significant parts of the armed forces, the names and addresses of the most hated butchers are unlikely to stay a secret for long. In Northern Ireland, for example, the Provisional IRA not only attacked soldiers, they made a habit of assassinating the officers, commanders, and politicians, both for revenge and as a display of might. From Lord Mountbatten to a near miss against Margaret Thatcher herself, to a score of less well-known targets, the IRA illustrates just how difficult it is to protect against an enemy that can simply choose to not wear a uniform before the enemy's visit. Now, with all that said, how likely is it that there will be some sort of civil conflict in the near or mid-future for the United States? Unfortunately, the correct answer here may very well be that it is not terribly unlikely. What is significant about America today is not that it's nearing its 250th birthday, but rather the clear and advanced signs of sickness in the body politic. The ranks of America's military are now sullen and battered after 20 years of failed nation building, while its higher officer corps is increasingly alienated from the world of its grunts, mirroring that same cultural, economic, and social divide that is currently poisoning civilian life in the U.S. The legitimacy of its elite has been shaken repeatedly, and faith in the electoral process itself is now rapidly declining among large segments of the electorate. America is currently a malarial swamp of strange new faiths, creeds, soothsayers, and itinerant prophets, from Q to vaccine scientism to various forms of pseudo-Gnosticism centered around trans people. To a student of history, this should also be a familiar and quite ominous sign. France in the 1780s had its own scientism and mesmerism, and Russia in the 1910s and 1980s was rife with soothsayers and itinerant preachers of new, strange faiths. Most ominously of all, however, looms the growing supply crisis. This crisis would be tolerable if it merely implied a lack of variety at the grocery store. In such a case, 2020's America might just have ushered in a new golden age of Soviet-era political jokes. But it is also creating havoc in the productive economy itself, denying farmers the spare parts to run their harvesters and car manufacturers the metals they need to make cars. The longer the crisis goes on, the more broken the economy will become, and the more painful the necessary reforms will be once America's elites truly wake up to the danger. And Malcolm K. Uni concludes his essay with this. If there is one time throughout history where civil wars are actually likely to occur, it is precisely when a delegitimated elite undertakes necessary reforms after letting underlying problems fester for decades. That is when states are at their weakest and when they are vulnerable to the worst forms of internal disasters. Sadly, that might just be where America is headed today. And of course, in his last paragraph, this is clearly an allusion to the Gorbachov regime in the Soviet Union. As mentioned many times here, Gorbachev came in as a reformer in 1985 with his glasnost and perestroika, and 6 short years later, the Soviet Union had been formally dissolved. I'm going to look at some comments here on unheard.com, and that's UNHERD. There are discontents throughout the country, especially in the southern states. That is an outmoded paradigm, says David Battle. Look at the electoral maps for the last 20 years. This is not a southern states issue. It is a rural voters versus urban voter issue. Urban voters control the money. Rural voters control the food. You cannot eat money. The very people that leftist America wants to destroy are literally the people who provide their sustenance. Blue cities could literally be starved into compliance. Bomb them if you want, and then starve even faster. Hardy Hodges comments, the national divorce is already underway. People are voting with their feet, as seen by New York and California, losing population to states where fewer personal restrictions exist along with lower taxes. If there is little advantage in living in larger urban areas, people will move. If people can work remotely, they can live anywhere. That assumes the electrical grid, at least an electrical grid sufficient to keep the internet going, continues to exist. If commerce is dominated by delivery vans, no need for local shops. If this migration continues, power centers shift. Urban areas dominated by those needing government to survive fail as the tax basis migrates. The renewed effort for a convention of states to affirm the U.S. Constitution may finally happen, with the potential to reform the swamp in D.C. A shooting war is not necessary in the national divorce. The people can do it for themselves. I wonder about that. By all rights, Baltimore should have sunk into the sea or just become a ruin by now. But the federal government pours so much money into Baltimore, both directly and indirectly, say to Johns Hopkins University, that despite the lack of a traditional tax base, it simply doesn't exist in Baltimore. Apparently, Baltimore is still a city that goes on from day to day. David Yetter comments, not so. The people voting with their feet mostly don't understand that what they are fleeing from are the natural consequences of the ideology they voted for decades, and end up remaking the state they fled to become more like California or New York than it was when they arrived, by continuing to vote the same way with their ballots that they did in the state they fled, cf. Colorado. Yes, I could also point out Vermont in this respect, and New Hampshire in this respect, and there are others. People fleeing, moving to western states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana. They are going to change those states, and they already are. Cat L says, I need to inform you that we are broke, can no longer afford to protect the world. Many experts are saying that the government is backing something called modern monetary theory. There may be a coming economic collapse, and then all bets are off the table. We are trillions in debt, It's disgusting what the government has wasted our money on. Rich people understand this and are spending millions on bunkers. Let Z try to take over. He will overextend his country just as we have. Putin will probably stay in his region, but we will eventually have to pay the piper. Globalization is a failure. Galeti Tavis comments, I am a construction worker in the deep South USA. I drive a pickup, have a dog at work with me, live in the woods, fish a lot, fly the American flag, am MAGA, believe in General Stark's live free or die. The people I spend most time with have no education past high school, work construction, drive trucks, fish a lot, are MAGA. They work hard, pay their bills, watch TV, no weird meetings and plotting and gun fetishes. They are not discontents. They are patriots. They get along with everyone, all races, all beliefs. We all just get along. No one wants any stupid crap like breaking up the country. None are white supremacists, and a lot of them are black anyway. They would fight for the country, not against it. Matt Heinemann says, if you think the Capitol Hill rioters are what would really be fighting in a new American Civil War, you were a fool. I don't know if you've ever met the shooter veteran blue-collar community in America, but they can be a lot more dangerous and competent than most people believe. Modern mass media likes to crap all over them since they are one of the few acceptable targets left. Get outside the bubble, read some history books, and take a good look at things like geography, logistics, loyalty breakdowns, particularly military infrastructure vulnerabilities, proficiency with and availability of small arms, technical skill, and potential recruitment. The overall picture looks very grim for any counterinsurgency operation. It does not help that there are many disgruntled veterans who have received 20 years of up-close guerrilla warfare experience from America's so-called nation-building exercises. And recent wars have shown America's technological firepower to have serious problems facing low-tech guerrillas with small arms. The good news is that these people require a very serious push to become engaged. They understand how ugly things can get and how the country stands a good chance of disintegrating no matter what happens. And as I say, I was aware of this essay, but I was rather shocked when it appeared in the Daily Mail yesterday. And let's see what the comments are there. There's one comment. It'll probably split into four. There's some America haters there. Someone from Liverpool said, it's not looking so cozy here in the UK either. The Scots will eventually secede, likely quickly followed by the Welsh. Really? The Welsh? The Welsh have been joined at the hip to England. Oh, for what, 900 years or so? I don't see them leaving. And what will be enough to settle the English, who are now just some diverse as Americans, if not more so, with those with a fundamental belief in a monarchy living next door to wokest fundamentalists? Another commenter from the UK says, true, the Confederate States will break away once again. This legacy of distrust in federal government has never gone away. Let's go to the chat. I just want to say that I'm going to talk about another recent essay by Malcolm K. Uni. I was struck, I think it was 2014 or 2015. There is, I believe, a law professor called Mark Tushnet, and he is the father of the, how should I say, eccentric Catholic writer Eve Tushnet. Let's see, he's a Harvard professor. Yes, he teaches at Harvard Law School, and he wrote an essay circa 2015. This was obviously in the anticipation of a victory by Hillary Clinton in the 2016 presidential election, that, essentially said, the culture war is over. We have won. It is now time to shoot the wounded. All you yahoos, are going to get what's been coming to you for a long time. We're fed up with you anymore. We have the power. We have all the power, and we don't need to put up with you anymore. Now, Tushnet's on the left, but you see these people like Kevin Williamson and, as I call him, Major Tom Nichols on the right, who have pretty much advocating for a scorched earth campaign against the red states or rural America. They're worthless and drunken and drug addictive and not productive. We don't need them. So, hello to No Sleep Till Breezewood, PA, Ann Run, Dan, William Hicks. Hello to Professor Paul, Kakva Pajarvaitya, a little Palpcasso 88, Glub Pasha reference in first minute. Why do people write loose instead of lose, says Chogokin 666? Because they lack a grammar skill, says Metal Mike. Hello to Oscar Toe. No Sleep says Scott Greer said it best. No one wants to actually fight a war. Just throw the book and other lawfare. Why do people not understand the difference between uninterested and disinterested? Because people who do point out the difference are accused of being pedants. I fear this may be a losing battle. Another battle that may be lost is people, it just infuriates me. They say beg the question when they mean raise the question. Beg the question refers to something specific in philosophy and, in fallacy, logical fallacy. That there's a planted axiom there that has not been proved. Daniel McDougall, hello to you. Oscar Toe says, what if all of us were in a snow globe, which is held by an autistic kid? I hope that's not a reference to the bisexual governor of Oregon, Kate Brown. You look angry. If you, in an illustrated dictionary, if you were to look up angry school marm, there'd be a picture of Kate Brown. John S. says not to mention that it hasn't won a war in several generations. Well, yeah, I suppose we can ascribe this to Harry Truman, who fought the Korean War at great cost to the United States without any plan to win. Fighting for, for 3 years, to a stalemate. It just seemed very, very strange. But of course, that became the norm. It was the norm in Vietnam as well. And it was the norm in Afghanistan and Iraq that I don't know if we just keep spending blood and treasure and keep telling these people how good our intentions are, as in we bomb you because we love you, then they'll just decide to, I don't know, become like Cambridge, Massachusetts, or Berkeley, California. Jokin 666 says the military apparatus is disengaging from its foreign atrocities. Turn inward. Hello to Gamion. Jonathan Paul says, you spoiled people all need to go teach public school in a poor majority area. Then you will know the nature of God. Golly, that sounds ominous. Why are we talking about Saint elsewhere? Dr. Deadname says you should have a teacher's assistant, Otto Kaganovich, to your Stalin. Professor Paul responds, I have one in my inclusion, lots of special students' classes. How many bombings did IRA carry out in London proper? I don't have that information in front of me. I can tell you I was in London in 1976, and I was in a subway station, or the tube as they call it, and a boy came up to me in absolute terror. Someone had left a suitcase near the end of the platform, and he was practically, gibbering in his fear because he thought that it was going to blow up. But why was the IRA so successful? Well, I don't like to say this, but it is true. The IRA successful was because there are so many Irish in England. That's the reason. They couldn't have succeeded without knowing that they had all of these people, ostensibly English, who thought of themselves more as Irish and would at the very least keep stum about their highly suspicious activities. Hello to Kontiki Roulette. More cheery news I see, says Agamion. Well, there is a kind of inevitability to this talk of collapse. That when one hears collapse, collapse, collapse all the time, then some people start to think maybe we should just get it over with. That's certainly what happened in the Soviet Union. Dr. Deadname says the military has a lot of dysfunction and very top-heavy and now full of ideological indoctrination that eats into training time. Popcasso88 says, KMG, do you have any interest in watching Midnight Mass? The guys at RLM were very enthusiastic about it. Is that a movie called Midnight Mass? Jonathan Paul says the urban ability to subjugate the countryside was already proven in the USSR, especially during 1932 and 1933. True, but I think there's a difference there. One being the sheer number of fanatics, students and the like, who went out into the countryside, spreading terror and being rewarded for it. I don't. There's a softness in the American elite, a terrible softness. Now, Antifa, they're not soft, but they're also nuts. William Hicks says, would the typical metrosexual, yes, this is speaking to my point, be willing to die for what he, she, it believes in, whatever it is? Exactly what are the grievances of the Starbucks mocha latte crowd? Overproduction of elite, I think, would be one of their grievances, and it's a serious one. Dionisa says, USA can't keep going like this. I expect we will reach a climax of terrible news sooner or later. Kontiki Roulette says, during World War II, there were places that were totally unaffected and carried on as normal. I'm going to live somewhere remote to avoid all the stupidity and plant wild berries. Well, I guess they thought they were off the grid in Waco, Texas, and up in Idaho as well. But I suppose that the lesson of Idaho is there's nowhere you can go to hide. Of course, if a government is going to decide to pick off weirdos one at a time, they can keep this up indefinitely. But if it's a question of mass action, that is different. Justin Proto, hello. Justin Proto says that, what's this fellow's name? Martin Armstrong. Yes, I've read his stuff. He's a smart fellow, saying USA will not exist as is from 2032. I guess coming under Mexican rule would not be absolutely terrible, says Jonathan Pohl, except that Mexico seems to be collapsing into a series of narco states. I mean, America's supposed to be interested in Mexico, right? I haven't seen a lot of interest in the American media of, like heads being put on pikes or being put on, bridges, underpasses on the freeway near Acapulco. That's a rather extraordinary story, but no, not a great deal of interest. What will happen to Ulster? Well, I guess they could try to be an independent country. It would fail. About 3/4 of all its revenues come from London, or it could join Ireland. Gamian says Putin continues to astound. The other day spoke in glowing terms about metaverse and how it'll bring people together. Maybe he's just trolling us. Kyle Jury done for the day, says Anrun. The rumor is he got unlucky with the 12 of 18 choices. Some Karens made it. Max Vitriol, hello, says Thomas Hobbs, a.k.a. William S. Lind. Victoria is a fairly realistic look at the tactics that could be used in a new American Civil War. I forgot about that quote. Didn't know it was Eve Tushnet, but not surprising, says No Sleep. No, I was referring to her father, Mark Tushnet. Eve Tushnet is certainly a strange woman, no question about it, but I don't get the impression that she hates her fellow countrymen. Hello to Caligula 138. Was the quote before or after she started calling herself Catholic, though, says No Sleep? Well, she calls herself gay. One can be a homosexual and a Catholic. It's actions that are forbidden, not some vague sexual orientation. Gay is a radical political ideology, which is totally inconceivable with Catholicism. Anrun says, Kevin, nothing wrong with liking the Stones better, but I hope you don't doubt the greatness of The Who. Yeah, I mean, how many really good albums did they make? Also, listening like listening to Tommy, which I found oppressive even at the time. Just knowing, Pete Townsend and sexual predilections make this a very unpleasant listen. Let's see. The snow globe reference comes from St. Elsewhere, Kevin says, Anran. Oh, okay. Let Kamala take power, says Red Sulfur. Well, yeah, it's you could call it a pre-revolutionary, pre-Civil War situation when people are asking the question, well, who's actually in charge in America? Because we know it's not Joe Biden. Is it his wife? There seems to be a very strong school that is advocating this. People who attacked Kyle had Eastern European names, says Red Sulfur. Grosskreutz? It sounds pretty solidly German to me. Professor Paul says first anti-fascist campaign was conducted by the NKVD in Western Siberia against Mennonites in 1934. The Forward had a long article about Jewish participation in Antifa gloating, said Red Sulfur. Well, it's a funny thing to gloat about, but I have absolutely no respect for the Forward, since it was, 20 years ago that the Forward decided in a very long and strange article that I was one of the greatest threats to the Jews in North America. Yeah, I know. That actually happened. Contiki Roulette says, I was amazed that after that British politician was killed, they rolled out the same waffle. We will continue as normal and not a single attempt at proposing a solution, even after one of their own died. Well, they gave in. Of course, Bill Clinton was pushing very, very hard for Britain to give in to the IRA, and they effectively surrendered to the IRA. Before, the Good Friday, the miracle of the Good Friday Accord, Sinn Féin was a negligible presence in Ireland, both the North and the South, and now Sinn Féin is, in government or very close to it. Oscar Toe says she calls herself gay. Indeed, she does. Quadrophenia was brilliant, says Chogokin. 666. The early stuff was great. Well, yeah, that's what they say. Oh, I like their early stuff. Yes. Ashley Bravo, hello, says Ed Dutton went on Tim Kelly's podcast to talk about his new book, essentially saying that feminist day are modern day iterations of the witches of old medieval times. Sounds legit to me. When the Who were mods, they were cool, says Caligula 138. I've heard it said, and it makes sense to me that the real mod band, or that is to say the band that was most popular among the mods, was the Beatles. Some Germans in Wisconsin, says Chogokin 666. Yes, indeed. Now, I'm going to go back to this rather odd Swede. His name is Malcolm Kayuni. He has a blog called tinkzorg.wordpress.com. Actually, and before I do that, I'm going to look at the responses on his Twitter feed. Nacho Friend says, I live in a red county in a red state, but it's a 55-45 split at most. There are not enough American troops to control my suburban county, much less the megalopolis of which it's a part. I think any military action would be very quick and ineffective. Renaissance Meathead says, the troops they'd send to do it are red state gun nut kids who wouldn't enforce anything. By the time they have to send them, they'll be fragging officers. Melody always agrees with me. Can't believe this is a top story in the Daily Mail. Truth to Power says the analysis is exactly backwards. His hypothetical has small-town Texas standoffs with the question of mixed soldier loyalty. If it gets bad, rural America would win a civil war and a walk, and the urban sophisticates would be cut off from food supplies. Yeah, the problem with these kind of predictions is that no one knows what will happen. Nobody knows what will happen. Wars, all sorts of, every kind of war is full of amazing surprises. And how could they have won that war? How could they have won that battle? Well, something happened. Maybe something that wasn't supposed to have happened. Dan Ballinger says, usually thinly veiled bloodlust comes from people very unfamiliar with bloodletting activities. Well, yes, if one looks at America's elite, for all their, foodieism, I know that a great many of them believe that, meat comes, wrapped in cellophane from Safeway or wherever, or Whole Foods. Well, where was it before then? We don't want to go into that. Lentus again says, as you say, it's not terribly unlikely. Like collapse of the euro, all the ingredients for total failure are there, but the most likely outcome, in my view, is continued dysfunction, degradation, and mini collapse. States, cities, bankruptcies, for example. Jim Kunstler's prediction, which is, 10 years old, maybe older, is a twilight of the federal government, that the government will simply not have the money, not have the power, not have the organization, not have the will to push its weight around as it has in recent years. Woko Haram says you may be right. It's hard to see how the 2024 election will be seen as legitimate by whichever faction loses. What I think most likely is that if the military is ordered to attack its own people, they will overthrow their own leadership and take control of the government. Well, when you have General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, boasting of his own military coup. Oh, no, I'm in charge of nuclear weapons, not the civilian leadership. And, I gave my good friends, the Chinese generals, a heads up. Somehow, for some reason, he's not swinging from a gibbet. Hippocleides says, in this sort of situation, the military unlikely to act with one mind. Any crisis that might occasion such an order is likely to have polarized the country already, including its citizen soldiers. Some will obey orders, others will not. Andreas says, interesting essay. 2 points came to my mind. I agree with assessment of difficulty of containing an insurgency. However, many military dictatorships have nonetheless survived several years. I find your thesis of states ignoring federal government more plausible than civil war. Yes, let's look at Venezuela. Perhaps we don't want to look too hard at Venezuela, because that just proves just how horrible things can get. And apparently it's the same people running the show. But let's go to this second essay called The Decisive Battle. It begins with a couple of quotations. The first from Isoroku Yamamoto. A lot of people are feeling relieved, or they're saying they're grateful to Admiral Yamamoto because there hasn't been a single air raid. They're very wrong. The fact that the enemy hasn't come is no thanks to Admiral Yamamoto, but to the enemy himself. So if they want to express gratitude to somebody, I wish they'd express it to America. If the latter really made up its mind to wade in on us, there'd be no way of defending a city like Tokyo. And the second quotation is from the German General Erich von Manstein. A war is not lost until you consider it lost. The essay begins, in recent days, the phrase, let's go Brandon, has taken on a life of its own. At one point, 4 out of top 10 songs on the Spotify top 10 list were called Let's Go Brandon. People are saying it as a form of greeting or wearing it on t-shirts. For some, this is just a funny gag. For others, it is a source of significant and growing dread. Dread about what is happening politically in the United States and what the future now looks to have in store for them. For those of you who don't know the context, at a recent NASCAR event in New Jersey, the crowd could be heard chanting F. Joe Biden after the race. During an interview with the winner of the race, a man called Brandon Brown, the flustered reporter, hearing the chant, then says on camera that the crowd must be very enthused for Brandon as they're all chanting, let's go Brandon, in his honor. Of course, the crowd is doing no such thing, and she and everyone else knows it. This little episode on its own is hardly very remarkable or significant. Others slowly pick up on the story and mock the journalists involved. But at this point, it's merely just another day of fake news, another day of the liberal media being the liberal media. However, like a dangerous respiratory virus, this little Brandon Institute then incubates for a week or two before blossoming out into something far more serious, into a true social event. People start saying, let's go Brandon at random, both as a mockery of the sitting president, but also as a way to mock the now increasingly toothless media apparatus, who fewer and fewer seem to take seriously at all. And this is where things become truly interesting. As at least one pilot then tells his passengers, "Let's go Brandon," before takeoff, liberal America starts to actually freak out. At this point, think pieces are produced by NPR and others claiming that there's a new form of conspiratorial code speak that racists are now using to note their displeasure with the sitting president. Others demand the offending pilot be fired, as it is obvious that he isn't really saying, "Let's go Brandon." He's actually saying, "F Joe Biden." The irony here should be quite obvious, as liberals are now decrying people for playing along with the very same cover story they invented out of thin air to cover up what is clearly growing dissatisfaction with President Biden. Some have taken this to be just another funny episode of internet humor leaking into the real world. But this is, to put it frankly, the delusions of an intellectual class who themselves enjoy being ironic on the internet, and who then quite myopically assume that everyone else must think and act the way they do. Middle-aged female nurses, as a rule, do not use 4chan, nor are they versed in or at all interested in the finer points of ironic internet humor. Political humor, coming from normal working-class people, might superficially resemble that of irony-poisoned college graduates, but in reality, they have very little in common. Moreover, there's a very large, very obvious flaw in this explanation of events. Again, the crowds at that NASCAR race weren't chanting, "Let's go Brandon." They were chanting, "F Joe Biden," and by all accounts, they certainly weren't being ironic about that. No coded language was intended, no mental jujitsu performed. Only when the media tried to use its incredibly hollow and thoroughly unimpressive powers of mind control did people start with ironic mockery, and that mockery was aimed both at the president as well as the clear powerlessness of the chattering classes to control the narrative or get people to believe them. And so, perhaps unsurprisingly, when airplane passengers hear the phrase, "Let's go Brandon," spoken over the intercom, they don't necessarily hear just a joke, but also a reminder that a political conflict they had tried to suppress is very much still real. Now, there's a whole bunch about World War II and Japan and Japanese military thinking, which I won't get into, but we'll move forward to this. Now consider the political situation in the United States in 2021 and what has transpired during the last 12 months. In a way, we have all been witnessing the execution of a modern political form of the Kante-Kessen, a decisive shock and awe campaign that is now clearly starting to run out of steam. To quickly recap the lead up to the current moment, in 2015, the Republican Party was all about business as usual, and the primary lineup was hailed as the most impressive crop of politicians on stage since those halcyon days of Ronald Reagan. Then Trump descended that escalator, and he quickly upended the stable order of things completely. The impressive candidates were defeated quickly, almost effortlessly, by a notorious showman and an army made up of the angry, forgotten people of Middle America. At first, the Democrats cheered, seeing this orange clown as easy prey for their putatively impressive candidate, Hillary Clinton. But then Clinton lost, and this unlikely orange tribune of the deplorables became the most powerful person in the world. Large parts of the Republican establishment refused to accept what had happened. The credentialed classes of America, almost to the last gender-fluid Z-Zim, violently refused to accept it. From day one, the election was widely seen as illegitimate, a result of Russian interference, and at every turn, the Trump administration was met with bitter resistance from all corners of the media, the deep state, and the NGO world. By mid-2020, it was clear that no one in America's email job caste would accept Trump winning another election. And from the death of George Floyd until the aftermath of January 6th, the email job caste of America put their own doctrine of Kante-Kessen into action. They gathered their strength and prepared for a mighty showdown, looking to strike such a ringing blow against the intruding plebeians and flyover deplorables that they would simply never be able to even think of fighting back again. The George Floyd riots were famously hailed as fiery, but mostly peaceful, by reporters standing in front of burned and destroyed buildings. And here, like a Japanese carrier group preparing to strike Pearl Harbor, all elements of the liberal woke battle line now came together. They controlled the universities, they controlled the media, they controlled the NGOs, the upper echelons of big business, the tech companies, and command such great majorities in such important professions, such as judges, doctors, and teachers. In the run-up to the elections, all elements of this war machine came together to make sure, by fair means or foul, that the election simply could not be won by Trump. Huge sums of NGO money flowed into various activist organizations, and the CEOs of some of the largest American companies eagerly lent their aid and economic clout to the war effort. Well, yes, I think this is tremendously important, and the importance of it is not really generally understood. One cannot have a legitimate political structure when one side, let's call them the Democrats, take the position of we always win. And if somehow we lose, well, we didn't lose because by definition, we always win. In fact, the line being pushed by Jennifer Rubin and others now is, in a democracy, the Democrats must win. That's what democracy means. Viktor Orban, not a Democrat, because he's not a liberal. Therefore, ipso facto, not a Democrat. And of course, as KMG points out, it was made very clear from after the election in 2016, we cannot allow this to happen again, and we will not allow it to happen again by any means necessary. And Time magazine devoted a cover story to chortling over how the elite decided to change a few things just to make it sure that Donald Trump could not win the 2020 election. KMG continues, every sector of America's knowledge worker caste came together from the middle of 2020 up to the election into its aftermath. Every single one. And it worked. In fact, it worked perfectly. Joe Biden was, after a few interrupted vote counts here and there, hailed as the single most popular president in American history. Nobody could dispute this, and the sorry people who did, if they could even be called people at all, were swiftly denounced as terrorists and traitors to the nation. The vote totals spoke for themselves after all. In other words, the woke really did it. They scored a perfect victory, just as the Japanese scored a perfect victory at Pearl Harbor. In 2016, the forgotten people of America had incredibly used the power of their votes to narrowly push Trump over the finish line. In 2020, the very much not forgotten people of America's urban cores and prestige institutions gathered all their might and routed the deplorables from the field. Yes, Joe Biden, the most popular president of all time. Now, do you believe your eyes and your ears? Did this man actually even run a campaign for president? This is a man who finished 5th in the New Hampshire primary, who would be trotted on, nobody in the crowd. But we'll use camera angles to make it look that this is just a traditional electioneering event. And then he'll dribble out some phrases. And what's he talking about? What? Huh? Eh? No. He's just so popular. He's just so likable that America just wants to give him a big hug. And, he turned out to be the most popular president in electoral history. And let's wrap this up here. On the other side of the tangles of barbed wire, however, the sleeping giants that are America's ordinary working men and women, or shopkeepers, firemen, nurses, and train drivers, are now slowly freeing themselves from their torpor. Today, they are once again beginning to use muscles that some had forgotten were there all along. Unlike the email jobs caste, this caste of people are far from being maxed out. Indeed, they seem to have almost no limit on their potential power at all. It is by their work alone that the big cities where the email caste lives can be kept going, and the more they are willing to use this power to fight back, the more doomed the email caste becomes. Yes, in retrospect, it might not have been such a good idea for Biden's government to call people complaining, parents complaining at school board meetings, domestic terrorists. That might not have been such a good thing. And it might not have been such a good thing for government officials to refer to the so-called vaccine hesitant as being murderers and criminals. Again, not, probably would have been, you won the election. Okay, you won the election. Somehow you managed to gain control of the Senate, so both houses. So maybe just sort of bask in your victory. But no, the Tushnet doctrine is the wounded must be shot. And you start a fight like that, who knows? Who knows where it is going to end? Of course, there's many different forms of warfare. And here's one. I'm looking at a chart on citizenfreepress.com. State by state costs of illegal immigration, excluding federal costs. Washington State, $2 billion. California, $25 billion. Sorry, Texas, $11 billion. Florida, $5.3 billion. New York, $7.5 billion. This is asymmetrical warfare we're talking about. Yes, you are not going to be in charge of America for very long because we've just opened the borders to all these people from Central America who are going to, they're going to take the jobs, and they're going to take over the schools, and in a few years they'll be voting, and guess who they'll be voting for? So, we don't have to worry about losing elections in the future because we'll just import ringers from abroad. Apparently America's elite, or the elite of my own country, do not understand how infuriating that is to people who consider themselves to be patriots. Here's a story from John Binder at Breitbart. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas says he expects that by the end of this year, more than 2 million illegal aliens will have attempted to cross the United States-Mexico border since January. Now, of course, the United States is a country of more than 300 million, but even so, 2 million people is a lot of people. And if it's going to be 2 million a year, well, we can see where that ends up. That's assuming, that present trends aren't interrupted. Oh, and there's also other sorts of asymmetrical warfare. Fifth columns, subversion. This is from Natalie Winters at thenationalpulse.com. Representative Elaine Luria, a member of the Congressional January 6th Commission, has six-figure investments in a Chinese Communist Party-linked tech firm flagged by the U.S. State Department for aiding the regime's military and espionage capabilities. The Virginia Congresswoman's most recent financial disclosure reveals an investment worth $250,000 to $500,000 in Alibaba, the Chinese e-commerce giant whose executives include powerful members of the Chinese Communist Party. Alibaba has also been involved in the research, production, and repair of weapons and equipment for the People's Liberation Army and has a deep record of cooperation and collaboration with China's state security bureaucracy, former Assistant Secretary for International Security and Non-Proliferation Christopher Ford revealed. And, oh yes, we're not going back to the before times. You got that? Okay. Maybe not call it the Great Reset because then you'd be accused of being a conspiracy theorist. But let's let the capitalists tell you. Well, it's a chief capitalist or a neoliberal, neoconservative shill from the Manhattan Institute called Allison Schrager. The labor market doesn't need antitrust protection. The Department of Justice is suing Simon & Schuster's merger deal, but industry consolidation can actually be a good thing for workers and authors. Does she seriously believe this? Yeah, let's just winnow them down to one publishing company. The Germans can run everything. And of course, that's going to mean bigger advances for authors because lack of competition is a good thing. And there's a piece that she wrote, the piece that she wrote before that, there was a lot of attention paid to it. overwhelmingly hostile, called Americans need to learn to live more like Europeans. Supply chain shortages are constraining U.S. consumers' endless appetite for buying whatever they want, whenever they want. It's about time. It's become the conventional wisdom that the U.S. economy is built on America's endless appetite to buy lots and lots of stuff. Household consumption makes up about 67% of GDP. When the economy falters, we're told spending is our patriotic duty. But suddenly, Americans can't spend like they used to. Store shelves are emptying, and it can take months to find a car, refrigerator, or sofa. If this continues, we may need to learn to do without. And horrors, live more like Europeans. That actually might not be a bad thing, because the U.S. economy could be healthier if it were less reliant on consumption. You know what? Whenever I see essays like this, I have a stock response, which I commend to you, which is you first. You first, sweetie. Oh, Americans should learn to live more like Europeans. Does Alison Schrager know that the welfare state is far more extensive in Europe than it is in America? Does she know how many weeks of vacation Frenchmen receive every year? I mean, I could give many other such examples. But no, things are still looking good for people like Alison Schrager. Oh, and yes, poisoning the wells. Joe Biden, the great uniter. This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. On the eve of the jury in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial beginning final deliberations, White House Press Secretary not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki, refused to explain why Joe Biden suggested the defendant was a white supremacist last year without any evidence to back up the claim. Fox News' Peter Doocy again confronted Psaki, asking, why did President Biden suggest that Kyle Rittenhouse on trial in Kenosha is a white supremacist? Biden's implication came in the following video ad campaign in the lead up to the 2020 election, which prompted the Rittenhouse family to file suit. In response to Doocy's question, Psaki said, what I'm not going to speak to right now is anything about an ongoing trial, nor the president's past comments. What I can reiterate for you, or repeat, as others would say, is that the president's view that we shouldn't have, broadly speaking, vigilantes patrolling our communities with assault weapons. We shouldn't have opportunities corrupting peaceful protests by writing and burning down the communities they claim to represent anywhere in the country. I have no idea what that is supposed to mean. How did all this burning come about? Was it osmosis? Was another one of these miasmas? But no, when Biden called Kyle Rittenhouse a white supremacist, effectively he was saying that this man doesn't deserve to live. Certainly doesn't deserve to live as a free man. There is a piece in the Daily Mail by Nicholas Sandmann, and you might remember him for his confrontation with a whacked-out old Native American Indian in Washington, D.C. at an anti-abortion rally. He writes, the parallels between me and Kyle Rittenhouse are impossible not to draw. Kyle was 17 years old when he became a household name after that terrible tragedy in Kenosha. I was 16 years old when I was catapulted into the national conversation by video of an encounter with a Native American activist on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Kyle was almost immediately labeled a white supremacist and a domestic terrorist. To many, my red MAGA hat clearly meant that I was a racist. In only hours, a CNN host tweeted an image of me writing, honest question, have you ever seen a more punchable face than this kid's? Kyle wasn't given his day in court by his critics, and neither was I. The attacks on Kyle came from the national news media, just as they came from me. And I would point out that they came from many so-called right-wing sources, including from National Review and from Size E Cup at CNN. They came quickly without hesitation because Kyle was an easy target they could paint in the way they wanted to. This is the problem with liberal media outlets in the United States. They want to get the story first, get the most views, make the most money, and advance the agenda from liberal patrons. These outlets cover themselves when they are wrong with small footnotes at the ends of long articles clarifying that new information has come out and that they have updated their coverage. News shouldn't be a scoreboard that constantly changes. News is about coverage that includes a statement of facts that does not need to be corrected, but the liberal media doesn't do this. The liberal media rushes to be the first to report. So every single label on Kyle as a terrorist, white supremacist, and school shooter in the streets of Kenosha will only ever be withdrawn after the damage has been done. In our hyper-polarized society, the first impression of Kyle has been set in stone, probably for the rest of his life. So do President Joe Biden, LeBron James, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, and every other commentator. Please be quiet. On November 10th, LeBron James tweeted out, "What tears? I didn't see one. Man, knock it off. That boy ate some lemon heads before walking into court." LeBron's tweet reflects the insensitivity and resentment of the liberal media and elites that has surrounded this entire ordeal from its beginning to now. I don't know. I would say there's no golden age of an accurate and fair media. Instead, you would have various outlets representing various interests. Pro-business interests, pro-union interests, pro-Democrat, pro-Republican, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is, of course, is that the media has simply overstepped. They have made a very serious error in claiming, as they do, Reuters, USA Today, Facebook Integrity, et cetera, that they own the truth, that they have a monopoly on the truth, when most of the time they have no idea what the truth is, or seeing as many of them are structuralists and post-structuralists, there's a question of whether they actually even believe in the idea of truth itself. Let's go to the chat. Ashiman Bravo says, President of Ukraine Zelensky in a video address says that Ukraine got intelligence from partners on alarming movement of Russian military near borders. U.S. warned EU that Putin may be planning an invasion of Ukraine. Head of CIA was just in Moscow. Yes, Don Willis says size E cup equals SE cup. Ashiman Bravo says Glenn Greenwald gave a 30-minute interview with Chris Hedges on RT about the new war on terror and anti-white war on the normal population of America. Don Willis says, I always thought she had a unique look, not pretty, but pretty enough. If I may be crude here, I mean, when you see the way that she presents herself, she is clearly looking for a certain response, which is nice rack. And yes, okay, that's certainly justified. But she's a stupid woman, stupid and ignorant. And she's a conservative thought. Of course, a lot of these women, conservative? No, I think that really limits me, I wouldn't want to define myself that narrowly. Denny McDougall says, yeah, consolidation is always good for workers. Just ask any bank tellers when the banks merged. I don't know. There's some people, the neocons, they want a war with Russia. They always want a war with Russia, or at least they wanted a war with Russia, for decades. I can only see this as Tushnet. Tushnet is an unfortunate name, said Chogokin666. That was my joke for years and years. Okay, so you have this lesbian woman writing about sex, because that's what she writes about, and she's called Eve, like Eve from the Garden of Eden with the snake. Tushnet. She's an internet writer. Tushnet. I mean, if you put that in a novel, people would say, come, you've gone too far. Chogokin666 says, does a blue check mark on Twitter indicate that the bearer should be ignored? I don't think so. I mean, a lot of people say that, and it is a meme itself. But my understanding is that it was just a verification. That's all it meant. It wasn't like a gold star. Hello to the new Barry MC, and I can't repeat your comment. The Basement Biden campaign from Dan. Love how Email Job made it into this piece. We're talking about Richard Spencer now. Jonathan Paul said if Wrangel, instead of Denikin, had first taken control of the whites in the South, it might have gone different. Well, the Finns made an offer to, was it Denikin? They said, look, we can just cross the lake, and we'll take over St. Petersburg, and we will put paid to these communists, and you can have the country back. But we have one condition. Well, what's that? You have to let Finland be independent. Nope, he wouldn't have it. He wouldn't have it, and it's difficult to think of more short-sighted decisions than that, certainly in recent world history. War has always been grease for economists and politicians, says Don Willis. Yeah. And, oh, yeah, this is, I don't know. I see a story like this, and the question is, are these people mad, or are they merely trying to drive the rest of us mad? This is from Steve Saylor's blog. This is Thomas E. Ricks. Oh, and he is a specialist in 21st century American history. And he has a book called First Principles, What America's Founders Learned from the Greeks and Romans and How That Shaped Our Countries. And he is a columnist at the New York Times, which, of course, inhabits an alternative universe. This is verbatim from Twitter. In fact, my presumption is that anyone tweeting that American cities burned last year is either working for the Russians or a dumbass dupe of them. One thing I've learned, Russian bots love the false narrative that American cities were burned by leftists this summer. Someone needs to do a better job of keeping these Putin-esque pests out of our social media. Again, is he mad, or is he merely trying to drive the rest of us mad? I forget which CNN reporter it was talking about peaceful protests last summer when it was just fireballs all around him. Thomas E. Ricks, Steve Saylor reminds us, is a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner. He was the Pentagon correspondent for the Wall Street Journal for most of the 1990s and military correspondent for the Washington Post for most of the 2000s. And Saylor has appended a picture here, Kenosha, the Bradford Community Church, Unitarian Universalist, Black Lives Matter, it says, and there's just an enormous fireball in front of it. Well, with many vehicles on fire as well. All this talk about Russian bots, that's very 2017, isn't it? What's the name of that English woman? She was rather attractive, who was one of the Cameron cuties. She was a conservative MP, and then decided, no, I don't want to be an MP anymore. I'm moving to America to live with my rock manager husband. She's still going on like this after all of these years. Perhaps someone in the chat can remind me of her name. She was actually, oh yes, there are sealed indictments that are going to drop any day now, any week now, any month now, any year now. Oh, it's our Finnish friend, Jaakko Rapala. Udinich came to Finland and offered independence to Finland in defensive alliance with Russia. It's Kolchak's refusal that destroyed that deal. Yes, sorry for my misattribution. Yes, Kolchak. Jaakko Rapala says, Mannerheim actually wanted Finland to join the whites in Russia, even after they refused to support Finland's independence, but he lost the power struggle and was ousted as a result. Oscar Toe says, all the media will say a war with Russia will kill off COVID-19 and people will buy this. I can't even conceive of a war with Russia. But assuming that Russian troops moved in to occupy the Donbass, who's in a position to do anything about it? Are we seriously expected to believe that America is going to drop nuclear weapons on Russia? How could they stop the Russian army from occupying the Donbass? I don't know that that it is demonstrated that the Russian army actually or certainly Putin intends to occupy the Donbass. Would Quebec fail as an independent country? Asked Palcasso 88. I don't think it would fail. It would be poorer than it is now. Well, of course, in Canada, we pay provincial taxes, which are substantial, and federal taxes, which are substantial. The tax burden is much greater in Canada than it is in the United States. And of course, if Quebec were an independent country, they'd only have to pay, the taxes of their new nation of Quebec. But of course, Quebec enjoys a welfare state much greater than the rest of Canada because the rest of Canada, well, particularly the western provinces, pay for it. And if Quebec became independent, they wouldn't get that money anymore. But speaking of Quebec, of course, I never failed to mention what Peter Brimelow wrote decades ago, that the question is not really whether Quebec should secede, but whether it should be expelled. J.J. McCullough has a column in the Washington Post. Last month, the province of Quebec was forced to face something that has become unaccustomed to, an ever slight diminishment of its political power. In 2024, seats in the Canadian Parliament will be reapportioned to reflect demographic changes. And since Quebec's population has shrunk relative to the rest of Canada, it will lose a seat in the House of Commons, the first time since 1966 a province has seen its seats decline during such a reconfiguration. The population decline of Canada's French-speaking province has a variety of causes, some simply due to the fall of formerly sky-high birth rates among French Canadians as the province becomes less Catholic. Well, that all happened in the 1960s. In the space of 1 decade, Quebec went from being an overwhelmingly Catholic province to a province that was just not Catholic anymore. And that was the result of Vatican II. It's the countries that were the most Catholic that suffered the most from Vatican II. Ireland and Spain are two other examples. Others are more a political byproduct of Quebec's anxiously enforced standing as Canada's distinct society. The Quebec government has been vastly more likely than other provinces to regard immigration as a cultural threat. For instance, unsatisfied with a succession of Quebec administrations that sought to strong-arm immigrants into assimilation through restrictions on religious clothing, in 2018, provincial voters elected one that simply slashed immigration altogether, a unique power Ottawa delegated to Quebec in 1991 to help preserve the distinct identity of Quebec. This stridently French-first social climate has driven many non-Francophones away. According to a 2016 paper by the Fraser Institute, the province has consistently had Canada's highest net rate of out-migration. Yeah, well, Crimea River. When Parti Québécois was first elected in Quebec in, I believe, 1975, almost immediately, 250,000 Anglophones abandoned Quebec. And why did they abandon Quebec? Because the thought of Quebec actually being run by the Quebecois was so anathema to them. Actually, it was the 1976 provincial election that the PQ took power. No, the Westmount Rhodesians were not going to live with the people that they mocked as Pepsis actually running the show. And, Brian Mulroney, yes, we're reminded that Brian Mulroney came up with this thing called the Charlottetown Accord, which was going to guarantee that Quebec would be assigned no fewer than 25% of the seats in the House of Commons in all future redistributions. And the Charlottetown Accord was a failure. Tremendous, tremendous failure. One less seat is unacceptable, thundered Conservative Quebec Member of Parliament Luc Berthold on Twitter. Premier Francois Legault said Quebec's seat count should remain static regardless of the evolution of the number of inhabitants in each province. Well, Bloc Québécois head Yves-François Blanchet went even further, declaring that, if anything, Quebec should gain a seat. Brazenly undemocratic as such demands may be, these days the National Parliament can nevertheless be counted on to move with maximum speed and sympathy whenever Quebec's dignity is at stake, or amour propre, to use the French term. Just a few months ago, an agreement in principle to amend the Constitution to give Quebec the unprecedented title of nation sailed through the House of Commons almost unanimously, following another command from Legault. Yes, the House of Commons voted some years ago that Quebec was a nation. We don't get a nation. And then apparently this is going to be put into the Constitution, although that would be illegal. But no, apparently we're just going to pretend that we've forgotten what the amending process to the Constitution is, which was the source of savage animosity at the time Canada's Constitution was amended in 1982. They're still pushing us around. I call it the blackmail bribery game. And during the last election, Aaron O'Toole, who despite his name is actually a man, he spells it Erin, he just grumbled to Quebec and essentially said, look, whatever you want, whatever you want, a conservative government will give it to you. J.J. McCulloch concludes, it's a cliche to call Quebec the spoiled child of the Canadian Union, but it's getting difficult to come up with a better adjective. That might sound like a statement of the invented pathology of Quebec bashing, but as Roald Dahl once put it, for though she's spoiled and dreadfully so, a girl can't spoil herself, you know. That article could never have been printed in any mainstream outlet in Canada. Nope. It would have led to, what happened a few years ago. Maclean's magazine had a cover with their winter symbol, Quebec's winter symbol, and it called Quebec the most corrupt province in Canada. The House of Commons formally apologized to Quebec and condemned Maclean's magazine. How about that, huh? This is from Kane at Citizen Free Press. Dr. Anthony Fauci says there is a misplaced perception about people's individual right to make a decision that supersedes the societal safety. It's funny that the sainted Dr. Fauci did not say the same thing about AIDS in the 1980s and 90s. Oh, no, 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 no. Here's what Anthony Fauci said about vaccine mandates in August 2020. Quote, it would be unenforceable and not appropriate, unquote. Kyle Lamb commented, this guy has very fluid core principles. But keep in mind, don't forget that the experts are always right. The science is always settled, except when it changes. Science is carved in granite. But this is a very special kind of granite that is quite malleable. So that when, for instance, Fauci and the World Health Organization say last year that masks are not efficacious in this respect, well, he was right then. But when they changed their mind that they are, in fact, efficacious and desperately needed, mandatory, then that settled science too, because the experts are always right. Of course, not that long ago, going back to our first topic, not that long ago, even an untouchable senior bureaucrat like Anthony Fauci, who's been on top for how many decades now, would hesitate to mock freedom the way that he has, because, Americans are fond of freedom. Now, less fond than they used to be. But again, there's a convention there. And the convention is that Americans are a freedom-loving people. So, knock it off with the anti-freedom remarks. The Team Zero COVID is flailing, wildly flailing. This is a rather desperate article that appeared in the Toronto Star today by Kenyon Wallace and May Warren. The battle against airborne COVID has shifted. Why your mask is the last layer of defense. Sauve qui peut, as they say. Save yourself if you can. Whether it's the moviegoer who ditches their mask at the start of the show to eat popcorn and never puts it on again, or the commuter on the subway who sports theirs just below the nose, mask use in Ontario seems to be slipping, literally. But with COVID-19 cases ticking up again with the cold weather, a reopened economy, and vaccination rates plateauing, Canada's chief public health officers urging people to double down on masking as a tool to help stop airborne transmission. In a series of tweets over the weekend, Dr. Theresa Tam, a series of tweets over the weekend from Dr. Theresa Tam is the Canadian equivalent of a host of royal proclamations. She stressed that the virus can linger in the air we breathe, much like secondhand smoke. And a well-fitting mask is vital to protect yourself when spending time in indoor public spaces, particularly in the absence of good ventilation. There has been a paradigm shift, in the thinking behind mask use to the current emphasis on protecting oneself as opposed to the initial consideration of keeping others safe from what we might be exhaling, said Colin Furness, an infection control epidemiologist at the University of Toronto. The game has changed, he said. We're not masking to protect others from our own droplets now. We're masking to protect ourselves from people who are being lackadaisical and reckless. Oh dear. I thought that we'd reached peak mental illness over COVID-19, but clearly we ain't seen nothing yet. What? We're going to have more people wearing these metal and plastic contraptions over their heads now? Seems likely. Yeah, let's have some panic porn. This is from Steve Karnowski at the Associated Press. Officials are so alarmed about the surge in COVID-19 cases in Minnesota that they're ready to allow all adults to get vaccine booster shots by the end of the week if the federal government doesn't approve them first. Health Commissioner Jan Malcolm said Tuesday. Oh, and they're using this word, blizzard. That is the word they are using with regard to Minnesota. But vaccination rates keep going up. So I don't know. Again, it must be some sort of miasma that we're talking about here. And a famous person has lost his job because of vaccine mandates. This is from Nelly Andreeva at Deadline. Original 911 cast member Rockmond Dunbar is leaving the hit Fox drama series after more than 4 seasons. His character, Michael Grant, was abruptly written off in Monday night's episode, leaving fans of the First Responders drama stunned. According to sources, Dunbar's departure stems from the new COVID protocols on the show, produced by Disney TV Studios' 20th Television, which require all actors to be vanquished. It's called 20th Television. You see the pettiness there? Disney bought Fox. And it used to be called, 20th Century Fox Television. But no, you got to eliminate the reference to Fox. Not, notwithstanding the fact that 20th Century Fox is one of the most known, most storied marks worldwide. But the devil mouse cannot allow anyone to suspect that they didn't invent, motion pictures and television entirely by themselves. I hear Dunbar requested a medical exemption and later sought a religious exemption. Both were reviewed by Disney and were rejected, sources said. According to insiders, Dunbar is not believed to be anti-vaxxer, but declined to comply with the COVID vaccine mandate based on the grounds he presented, which led to his exit from 911. He said in a statement, I applied for religious and medical accommodations pursuant to the law and unfortunately was denied by my employer. My sincerely held beliefs in private medical history are very intimate and personal aspects of my life that I do not publicly discuss and have no desire to start now. I've been an actor in this business for 30 years, but my greatest roles are as a husband and father to our 4 small children. As a man that walks in faith, I look forward to what the future holds. And let's check out the latest figures from Ontario. Which is Canada's most populous province. This is from Carissa Wilson at CP24. Ontario reported nearly 500 new COVID-19 cases and 1 more death on Tuesday as the 7-day rolling average continued its upward trend. 1 more death on Tuesday. Now, presumably, this is going to go up and down. This is a crisis. There are 14.8 million people in Ontario. 1 death on 1 day. How is this a crisis? For the past couple of weeks, the 7-day rolling average of new cases has been gradually rising. It hit 579 today, up from 492 a week ago. Among the latest cases, 236 of the individuals are unvaccinated, 18 are partially vaccinated, 189 are fully vaccinated, and 38 have an unknown vaccination status. To date, 88% of eligible Ontarians have received 1 dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, and 85% have received 2 doses and are considered fully vaccinated. You can come to your own conclusion about what those numbers mean. And more news on this from NBCConnecticut.com. 8 people are dead and just shy of 100 more have become infected with COVID-19 after an outbreak at a Connecticut nursing home. The outbreak at the Gear Village Senior Community, a nursing home and rehabilitation center in Canaan, started around the beginning of October when the nursing home was reporting 3 positive COVID-19 cases. Now, 8 residents have died, and 67 residents and 22 staff members caught COVID-19 sometime in the past month and a half. Nursing home officials said 48 residents and 21 staff members have recovered from the virus. So what's the vaccination status there? Of the 89 total infections, 87 people were fully vaccinated. Again, I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions. But remember, as you do, that the experts are always right, and they are always right by definition. Let's go to our favorite statistician, William M. Briggs, whose essay today, Court Bashes Vax or Starve Dictate UK Vax Terrible Efficacy Revealed, More Coronavirus Update. Update 106. And he leads with a tweet from Paul Thacker about the swine flu. And 46 million Americans got the swine flu vaccine. It was not a success. It was not a success in stopping the disease, and it also led to a great deal of neurological damage among Americans. Briggs comments, that which has been is what will be, that which is done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. From the Hill, Surgeon General warns of uptick in COVID cases as cold weather arrives. Now, what could be the cause, dear experts? It can't be cold air by itself. It has to be something else. All you lockdown fans, please answer first. Much good news in the Fifth Circuit's reaffirming the stay of Biden's dictate, which happened late last Friday. The court order is linked. First and obvious, the stay remains in place until a full review. If Biden again dictates, ignore the court, we have a real cold civil war upon us. By Biden, I, of course, mean those telling him what to say. The court said, we first consider whether the petitioner's challenges to the mandate are likely to succeed on the merits for a multitude of reasons. They are. Then the juicy bit, which overreach of OSHA. That overreach was not intended to authorize a workplace safety administration in the deep recesses of the federal bureaucracy to make sweeping pronouncements on matters of public health affecting every member of society in the profoundest of ways. How about that? Also, on the dubious assumption that the mandate does pass constitutional muster, which we need not decide today, it is nonetheless fatally flawed on its own terms. The mandate's stated impetus, a purported emergency that the entire globe has now endured for nearly 2 years, and which OSHA itself spent nearly 2 months responding to, is unavailing as well, and its promulgation grossly exceeds OSHA's statutory authority. But the mandate, the court, this is more from the court, but the mandated issue here is anything but a delicate exercise of this extraordinary power. Quite the opposite. Rather than a delicately handled scalpel, the mandate is a one-size-fits-all sledgehammer that makes hardly any attempt to account for differences in workplaces and workers that have more than a little bearing on workers' varying degrees of susceptibility to the supposedly, quote, grave danger, unquote, the mandate purports to address. When you were reading the stories, my dear viewers and listeners, did any of the stories you read about this court's decision give any indication of how the contempt with which it regards the Biden administration's overstep? Because my reading of these stories didn't give me a clue of how savage this judgment is. Briggs comments, there is a discussion of the asinine don't sit here, sit there fallacy, our rulers love, which insists workers can only get infected at offices only if unvaccinated and nowhere else. According to the court, OSHA's attempt to shoehorn an airborne virus that is both widely present in society and thus not particular to any workplace and non-life-threatening to a vast majority of employees into a neighboring phrase connoting toxicity and poisonousness is yet another transparent stretch. It is thus critical to note that the mandate makes no serious attempt to explain why OSHA and the president himself were against vaccine mandates before they were for one. Here, the mandate is staggeringly overbroad, the court ruled. OSHA itself admitted that an ETS once issued could very well become ineffective or counterproductive, as it may be informed by incomplete or ultimately inaccurate information. Yes, this is very good news indeed. Briggs continues, the U.S. puts out a weekly report on vax status, though it recently dropped reporting rates by age group because we presume the vax wasn't looking too good. However, we can still figure them out on our own, a too rough approximation. Here's how it works for one age group. According to Table 5B in the Week 45 report, 1,833 vaxxed croaked within 60 days of positive coronavirus test and 185 unvaxxed. Golly. How about that, huh? But no, you can make your own judgments on this. I'm not going to do that for you. And 1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock jab, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8 o'clock jab, 9, 10, 11 o'clock jab around the clock tonight. This is from Caitlin Owens at Axios. The Biden administration is expected to begin the process of expanding the booster authorization to all adults as early as this week, according to a source familiar with internal planning. Yes, why don't you condescend to us, Axios, why it matters. Yes, that's what it says here. And then the big picture. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you for telling me why compelling or compelling Americans to get a third shot, why that could possibly matter. And similar thinking in Britain. Number 10, that would be the government, number 10 Downing Street, plans booster jab requirement for people to obtain COVID pass. This is from Jessica Elgott at The Guardian. 2 is not enough. Israel is one of the rare countries in which there has actually been something of a debate about COVID-19 policy. This is from Mayan Jaffe Hoffman at the Jerusalem Post. No matter how old you are, 2 shots of Pfizer vaccine don't last. Study. People's ages had no effect on the vaccine's waning, meaning that the vaccine waned for everyone and not just older people. People vaccinated with 2 shots of the Pfizer coronavirus vaccine in January and February had a 51% increased chance of contracting the virus in July compared to those who were vaccinated in March or April, a new Israeli study published in Nature Communications has shown. The team of researchers from the KI Institute worked with doctors from KSM Research and Innovation and used data provided by Maccabee Health Services to conduct a retrospective cohort study comparing the incidence rates of breakthrough infections and COVID-19 related hospitalizations between people vaccinated toward the beginning of the country's campaign, January and February, and those vaccinated towards the later stages, March and April. The study included more than 1.3 million records. As noted, the risk of infection was significantly higher for people the earlier they were vaccinated, with an additional trend for high risk of hospitalization. The results, the researchers said, are consistent with other studies on the subject that show a decline in antibody levels and immune system compounds after 4 to 6 months. Moreover, people's ages had no effect on the vaccine's waning, meaning that the vaccine waned for everyone and not just older people. The vaccine's effectiveness wanes equally for everybody, according to the study, according to Dr. Barak Mizrahi, a researcher in computational health for KI Institute, who led the study. Israel set a policy to administer a 3rd shot to all individuals over the age of 12, in contrast to many other countries and the recommendation of the World Health Organization, only to give the 3rd jab to people at the highest risk of contracting the virus or developing serious disease. Now, again, I'm a little confused here, because here we have two groups of experts who seem to be at loggerheads with regard to the boosters. Now, if the experts are always right, but experts can sometimes disagree, I'm scared. That's all I'm going to say. Okay. And this is from Bloomberg. Germany is heading towards stiffer restrictions on people who refuse the COVID-19 vaccine as authorities across Europe seek to rein in a renewed surge in the pandemic. And, this is a new one to me. Under pressure to act, you got to act. You always got to act. Act first. Always act first. Lawmakers from the potential new ruling coalition are planning to introduce legislation later this week that would impose tougher curbs on people who have not been inoculated, including requiring tests to go to work and take public transportation. Who knows? That may be coming to my own dictatorial province of British Columbia, but I walk literally everywhere I go. And generally, if I have to take the bus, I don't go there. I'm up to walking, 3 miles there, 3 miles back. So even if they bring this in BC, it is not going to affect me. Now, if they make it illegal for me to go outside, well, yeah, that would be a different matter. Wouldn't it? And let's go to Lockdown Skeptics, or dailyskeptic.org, as it is called now. Amanda Pritchard reveals the National Health Service is preparing a yearly COVID booster scheme, already putting plans in place that, should it be required, to deliver a yearly COVID booster vaccine campaign similar to the annual winter flu jab program, reports the Mail Online. Germany hits panic button. Merkel to follow Austria and lock down 14 million. Sturgeon warns, this is Scotland, warns COVID passport system may be extended before Christmas. Sturgeon leaving pubs in the dark over vaccine passports extension. Ireland introduces new coronavirus restrictions, including midnight hospitality curfew as country battles fourth wave of infections. I don't know, telling the Irish that they won't be able to drink past midnight could be dodgy. And climate change skepticism in line for censorship. Enjoy the Daily Skeptic while you can. A powerful network of climate change activists is working on stamping out climate change misinformation once and for all. And by climate change misinformation, they don't mean things like claiming that we have 18 months to save the planet. See this piece by the BBC's environment correspondent. Gordon Brown, Prime Minister of England, he said about 10 years ago that if we don't get this sorted out in 5 years, we're all going to die. Well, it wasn't all sorted out. And are we all going to die? They mean anything that challenges the prevailing orthodoxy about climate change, however well evidenced. A reader received an email today inviting him to attend a censors conference organized by the Institute of Government and Public Policy. Major UK brands, including Virgin Mobile, O2, Sky, British Gas, Ben & Jerry's, and SSE, have signed an open letter. I was kind of on the fence there, but then when I found out that Ben & Jerry's, that is to say Ben & Jerry's in the United Kingdom, is calling on COP26 decision makers and technology platforms to take immediate action on stamping out climate change misinformation once and for all. Ben & Jerry's, that's sort of, okay, I'm persuaded now. I'm persuaded. Repeated lockdowns have seen childhood obesity rates spike to record highs. According to the National Child Measurement Program, obesity rates in reception-age children jumped from 9.9% to 14.4% over a single year. That consisted of repeated lockdowns and restrictions, meaning that 1 in 7 children begin primary school classified as obese. Meanwhile, for children in their last year of primary school, the obesity rate leapt from 21% to 25.5%. The chief executive of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, I've written about Jamie Dimon in the past, and he's an exceedingly nasty man, entered Hong Kong without following the territory's mandatory 21-day hotel quarantine law. Carrie Lam, the current chief executive of Hong Kong, mentioned that the reason for Dimon's lenient treatment was because he manages a very large bank with key business in Hong Kong. And before any of you in the chat go railing about this fellow being a Jew, he is not a Jew. He is of Greek Christian origin. And, oh yes, there's two elements to this next story. The first element is culture of death. And the second element is ka-ching. You could call it a murder bonus. This is from newbostonpost.com. Tom Joyce. If you're employed by the city of Boston and you have an abortion or your child is aborted, you can now get up to 12 weeks of paid leave from your job. That's thanks to an amended version of the city's paid leave ordinance that passed unanimously through a voice vote during a meeting of the Boston City Council on September 15th. Boston's acting mayor, Kim Janey, signed the ordinance September 17th, and it went into effect immediately, according to a spokesman for the mayor. The city's paid parental leave policy now includes 12 weeks of paid leave for both men and women for pregnancy loss, including all abortions for any reason. It seems to me, obviously there's exceptions to this. If you can be gone from your job for 12 weeks and no one notices, then why does this job exist? And okay. So the gays have won their battle to give blood in Canada. Well, I suppose we should all cheer for that. Now, the last time that happened, a lot of people died. And actually, the Red Cross was banned. They were in charge of blood collection, and the government, no. The Red Cross deliberately decided to use tainted blood in Canada to expend their stocks, even though they had untainted blood from the United States that they could have used instead, and no one went to prison for this. And, the fusionism, I don't know, a little dry. Maybe I'll talk about fusionism tomorrow. Oh, we're all so very concerned about climate extinction, right? And especially Canada, which is just a massive economic power. And, we have to destroy our economy, especially destroy our energy industries. But meanwhile, according to Reuters, China's October coal output rose to the highest since at least March 2015, after Beijing approved a raft of coal mine expansions to tame record prices and boost supply. The world's biggest producer and consumer of the dirty fossil fuel, that's what it actually says in this news story from Reuters, it churned out 3.57 million tons of coal last month, up from 334 million tons in September. Output over the first 10 months of 2021 was 3.3 billion tons, up 4% year on year. And again, if you're, put out by my weird pronunciation, I'm talking about a metric ton, which is about 2,200 pounds, imperial pounds. And it is pronounced tons, as ridiculous as that sounds, because if it weren't pronounced tons, then people would confuse it with the imperial ton. A funny thing happens in countries like Canada. When you might hear that something is tons of fun or something weighs a ton, a metaphor, they always replace T-O-N with T-O-N-N-E or with the S. They don't seem to care that it doesn't mean the same thing, that there are no metaphorical uses for a metric ton. But no, we must have metric everything, even now, metric language. I wanted to talk about Jennifer Rubin, who is a She's an unfortunate person. She's a leading neoconservative, or just. Do you remember when we were told some years ago that the use of the term neoconservative itself was anti-Semitic, despite the fact that the man generally credited with inventing neoconservatism, Irving Kristol, wrote 2 books with that word in the title. Jennifer Rubin, who is, I don't know how she has this rep of being a conservative or a right-winger, because her career is a mystery to me. Something 9/11. She was an entertainment lawyer in Hollywood. Yeah, that's right. And she is about as right-wing as you would expect someone like that to be. But it turns out that Jennifer Rubin really does not like Christianity. That Jennifer Rubin believes that Christianity is a dire threat to America itself. I suppose this is in no way evidence of religious bigotry on her part. She tweeted November the 11th, as essential as the short and intermediate term reforms may be, a more fundamental threat looms. This entails confronting the white evangelical crusade to prioritize white power and Christian ideology over democracy. Once again, as discussed earlier, democracy means the Jennifer Rubins of the world win every single time. If Jennifer Rubin is displeased by an election result, ipso facto, that is not democratic. And let's go through this thread. Right-wing pseudo-intellectuals, unabashed champions of nativism in right-wing media, and cynical Republican politicians have heightened racial resentment and undermined the building blocks of democracy. In many instances, however, they are merely racing to catch up with the mob. Now, the mob doesn't refer to those people, who burned down Kenosha and other American cities. No, the mob is the people who are opposed to this. White evangelicals' Faustian bargain with Trump and his movement meant that these communities sacrificed their religious virtues. Oh, you are really sailing close to the wind. What do you know, Jennifer Rubin, about the religious virtues of evangelical Christians? Sacrifice their religious virtues and principles for power and the false sense of security that a ruthless warrior could push back the tide of secularism and racial diversification. Oh, I never actually saw that in the New Testament anywhere, about the tremendous, the divine command for racial diversification. I seem to recall something in the Old Testament about the Tower of Babel. Reinvigoration of democratic values, inculcation of tolerance, renewed respect for diversity, and acceptance of science must come from authentic voices with credibility in those communities. Oh, I see. You're issuing demands now. Are you? Issuing demands. Here's a Jennifer Rubin on November the 9th. There is nothing Democrats can give them, that is evangelicals, e.g. jobs, cheaper health care, to satisfy their need for white Christian ascendancy. You getting it yet? Jennifer Rubin hates you. She hates you. Trump was determined to protect white evangelicals against people of color and the decline in Christian identification. That was all they could hope for in a politician. Never mind that Donald Trump was the most pro-Israel, pro-Jewish president, at least since Nixon, and maybe of all time. That is not enough to satisfy Jennifer Rubin, because the evangelicals didn't get it in the neck. If I were to give her some advice, I would say that the treatment of of minorities depends on the goodwill of majority. And calling a group which is vastly bigger than your own group, effectively class enemies that deserve only punishment, not wise. It would behoove Jennifer Rubin to tone down her rhetoric, but she simply can't help herself. Hatred is what comes most naturally to her. Let's go to the chat. Oh, that's literally what the doc claimed, that Reagan killed all the gays, says Palmcastle88. Oh, I remember those days. I remember those days very well. It was Reagan. There was a Reagan administration that turned HIV/AIDS into the business that it is today, but no good deed ever goes unpunished. KMG, you're living in the WEF walkable neighborhood lifestyle, except that it will eventually be mandatory to stay in one's neighborhood, says Ogan's Iron. Hello to Yo Mama. The homophobes are all the real monsters. Okay. Tons, damn it, says Chogokin 666, the pronounced Ton Death March. Expect bug people to say that they'd rather catch HIV than be a homophobe, says Yo Mama. Is this the same Red Cross that got skimming that 911 fund money? Well, no, as I say, there's an organization called Canadian Blood Services, which collects blood in Canada now since the 1980s or early 1990s. There were trials in France for a similar scandal, blood scandal, but in Canada, no. Well, we're not up for that sort of thing. Something like 60 or 70 children were thought to have been murdered at the Toronto Hospital for Sick Children. There was never any convictions for that. Contracoup, hello, says my favorite part of the vaccine rollout is that the authorities announced that there would be a biannual booster schedule even before the vaccines or their immune response existed. Brandon Smith, hello. Internal memo, stop thinking in terms of objective journalism. Well, you know, I wrote for almost a decade for a magazine that was certainly more objective than, you know, what passes for objectivity at the Washington Post or the CBC or the New York Times. The opposing viewpoint was always included, always included. There was no question that the magazine that I worked for had an ideological bent. There's no question about it. We didn't deny it. But what roils me, oh, yes, we're disinterested. No, you're not. No, you're not. Oh, you're radical activists. Don Willis says, I never thought I would see the day where half of the country is pissed off because a minor killed a pedophile. 100 random people tested at a nearby business. 90% of them were full vaccinated, said Brandon Smith. Well, you know, one of the studies, this enormous study in the New England Journal of Medicine that was cited by AB last week, pointed to millions of people who had COVID-19 and never knew that they had it. Again, I will leave you to assign what significance you will to that. Contracoup says OSHA, the same organization that condoned healthcare companies requiring doctors and nurses to reuse soiled N95 masks, now wants to mandate vaccines for everyone because science. Contracoup says, KMG, don't you get it? At this rate, the current population of Ontario will be dead in 4,054 years. Don't you have a heart? Ogan's Iron said, KMG, Fauci versus individual rights versus society. Besides Rand Paul, is anyone on Fauci's case regularly? Can Fauci really get away with hand-waving freedom? I suppose he can get away with hand-waving freedom for as long as it works. And I don't know that this admission, the story in the LA Times last week from the CDC itself on efficacy, the jig is up, my friends. The jig is up. Does anyone get AIDS anymore? Asked Oscar Toe. Well, you have these PrEP, they call it. The United States government ordered all insurance companies to pay for PrEP. It's also covered under Canadian socialized medicine. Costs over $100,000 a year per person. $100,000 a year. And let's talk about France. An absolutely Michel Goldberg. I came across this because Michel Goldberg was very approving of it on Twitter. Just an absolutely furious article by someone called Adam Schatz in the London Review of Books. And it begins with the ultimate authority, Philip Roth. The American writer in the middle of the 20th century has his hands full in trying to understand, describe, and then make credible much of the American reality. Philip Roth wrote in commentary in 1961, it stupefies, it sickens, it infuriates, and finally, it is even kind of an embarrassment to one's own meager imagination. The actuality is continually outdoing our talents, and the culture tosses up figures almost daily that are the envy of any novelist. I don't know. Mencken had some fun with that. Apparently, it was just too outraging to Philip Roth. Okay, when Donald Trump was elected president, and this essay is about Eric Zemmour. What Donald Trump and Philip Roth and Charles Lindbergh have to do with this Algerian Jew named Eric Zemmour, that's an interesting question. But I guess Adam Schatz has some hobby horses he likes to ride. When Donald Trump was elected president, many people were struck by the eerie prescience of Roth's 2004 novel, The Plot Against America, an alternative history in which the right-wing isolationist Charles Lindbergh defeats Franklin Roosevelt in the 1940 presidential election, imposing a reign of terror. But the Roth of 1961 had it right. Trump provided a humbling reminder that fiction is no match for what Roth called the American berserk. America is hardly alone. That's your segue? The most hysterical and also the most articulate and therefore dangerous manifestation of what might be called the French berserk is the journalist and potential presidential contender Eric Zemmour. His emergence has thrown into relief the meager imagination even of Michel Houellebecq, whose 2015 novel Soumission told the story of a Muslim businessman of Tunisian origin who becomes France's president and imposes Sharia. The reality is no less wild, the rise of a North African Jewish intellectual who calls for the rehabilitation of Pétain and Vichy while depicting immigrants and Islam as mortal threats to the Republic. Zemmour resembles Trump in his ability to recast the rhetorical rules of right-wing politics. When Marine Le Pen invokes the threat of Islamism, Zemmour speaks bluntly about Islam to court. It's even more than a civil war, he says. It's a war of religion that threatens us. Zemmour thinks that France has nothing to apologize for, especially not colonization or metropolitan racism. French citizens of Algerian origin should be grateful that when their ancestors came to settle in bidonvilles in the Hexagon, quote, France was a good daughter and a good mother and very generous. You see, what upsets Adam Schatz here is that I know it sounds ridiculous, but Eric Zemmour is a French patriot. Yeah, this is what outrages him. I've spoken on this live stream of Vichy France, and I have spoken of its effect on a novelist, a Jewish novelist whose work is very dear to me. It ended up with her death at Auschwitz in 1942. But the thing is that France is not my country. I have an admiration for it, and I have a certain, familial, historical ties to it. The argument that Zemmour has been making is that, French history is of a piece, and that it is not a good idea to go around denouncing this or that part of French society. I have an affinity, to the monarchist camp in France, but I just don't see that happening. I just don't see a restoration of the monarchy, and of course, to tout the monarchy is implicitly to deride the republic. Anyway, Schatz continues. As Le Pen is learning, a lot of French people like what they're hearing from Zemmour. They don't want to diabolicize Rassemblement National. They want their racism and rage served up straight. Just as many Republican voters in the States turned out to prefer Trump's explicit white nationalism to the dog-whistling versions the Republican Party had been peddling for decades. Zemmour is currently polling at 17%, Le Pen at 16%. Their combined support exceeds President Macron's 24%. Why this Jewish writer is such an admirer of Muslim immigration to France is something of a mystery. What is it, self-hatred? Given how the Muslims have acted in the past and how they continue to act in France, especially against Jews. Still, the differences between Zemmour and Trump are also striking, unlike Trump, whose books, put it, there's scare quotes there, were all ghost-written. You didn't need the scare quotes, okay? Zemmour is an intellectual who models himself on reactionary writers such as Maurice Barrès. He is also a skilled polemicist, and he really believes what he says. Zemmour's ideas are extremist, racist, and exclusionary. Racist, 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 racist. Yes, the idea that the French deserve their own country, just unpardonable. But the groundwork for his rise was laid by mainstream intellectuals and politicians who suffer from a milder version of the French berserk. Zemmour has popularized the ideas of the great replacement theorist Renaud Camus, but he also owes a debt to respectable intellectuals such as Alain Finkielkraut, who has described anti-racism as worse than racism itself. Where's the lie, though? More important still, Zemmour's anxieties about the threat posed by Muslims to laïcité have been echoed for years, if in a less overtly toxic form, by centrist politicians from Manuel Valls to Emmanuel Macron. When people like Adam Schatz are, well, to be crude, pissing themselves over, a solitary intellectual, a TV star called Eric Zemmour, this is gladdening news because it tells me they're scared. And when these people, when the elite are scared, it means that good things might actually happen. Let's take a final look at the chat. Oscar Toe says most, if not all, celebs' books are ghost-written. Indeed. Indeed. Ogan's Iron says hopefully the Rubins demand censorship of the Bible itself. Then maybe evangelicals will stop calling those guys older brothers in the flesh. Well, I do believe that they're older brothers. That's not to wish away the enormous differences between the Old and the New Testament. And there's no such thing as Judeo-Christianity. As Thomas Fleming pointed out, you could say that Judeo-Christianity existed for the first 100 years of Christianity because almost all Christians were Jews at that time. But, Cardinal Ratzinger, he wrote a book with a Jewish rabbi and a student of the Talmud. His name escapes me now. He wrote something like about 500 books and was the religion editor of Chronicles magazine. And they had a great deal of respect for each other, but each of them pointed out that Christianity is not Judaism and Judaism is not Christianity. It's not helpful to pretend that the opposite is true. Hello to Lamprey Milt. Thank you for your kind words. Respectable commenting name says, do you still pray for them to find Christ, presumably within the Catholic Church? I know this has been frowned upon for 60 years or so. It's been pretty well extirpated. Yes. Now, these are the very words of, we know what the words of Jesus Christ on this subject were, and no one is exempt from this. But the Catholic Church has pretended to believe otherwise. Most. As I say, I used to be an editor, and I edited for the Report magazines, but I've also done freelance editing work, and I can tell you, people who are, famous or well-known, what their essays look like when they're handed into the editor and what they look like when they are printed in the magazine or newspaper, usually they are quite different. Yo Mama says 6 republics and the French still haven't got a clue. We have anything else there? I like chick parm with potatoes instead of pasta, says Chogokin 666. That's interesting. Is he a pied noir? Yes. Yes, indeed, he is. I don't know. That Hungarian fellow who was Sarkozy, Hungarian Jewish fellow Sarkozy, 10 20 years ago or whatever, he called these French rioters in the suburbs, he called them racailles, which means rabble. It's hard to imagine. You imagine if a Republican referred to those in the streets, the peaceful protesters for George Floyd and the like, he called them rabble. No, I can't see that. Can't see that happening. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you all for tuning in. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. What is coming up on the show? On Thursday, Theater Thursday, I'm going to be discussing Peter Brook's 1963 black and white in the Academy ratio, 4:3, classic version of Lord of the Flies. And on the book club on Friday, I'm going to be discussing a book about murder and mayhem as reflected in popular song. It is called I Shot a Man in Reno by Graham Thompson. And on Music Monday, November 22nd, I'm going to be talking about the fabled Disco Demolition Night, July the 12th, 1979 in Chicago. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which very honestly I kind of desperately need right now, well, it'll be like truly desperate in 3 or 4 days, but right now it's just like quite desperate. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations may be made directly to the live stream at through Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.